Have we complacently accepted the default position? If you talk to many of your colleagues, they will just say, oh, boards, they're not doing what they could. What a disappointment. What a sometimes waste of time. And yet we've accepted this default position, this status quo, as sometimes our unchangeable reality. And so with that, how could we go to a different place? I think it starts with understanding what our boards could do or should do for us. When we look at nonprofit boards, we know that they come to our organization as honest brokers who have outsized credibility with those who are out in the community. People look at them and they don't see them as a hired gun of the healthcare organization. They simply see them as someone who is there because advancing your healthcare mission was the right thing to do. It was something they believed in deeply. They recognized that you were a critical community resource. And so when they went out and said to others, this place is amazing, you would want to be part of it too, others listened to them in a different way. And so with that, they brought something that wasn't duplicated anywhere else in the healthcare organization. Even when we look at allies like our executives and our physicians, they bring huge leverage to our work, but not in the same way that board members do. You've also got to look at some of the simple performance facts. That when you look at the ability to simply open a door, board members are 4 times more effective. There was a research study that was done that said that when a nonprofit development executive tried to secure an initial meeting with a donor, they were successful 2 out of every 10 times. When a board member tried to secure the same meeting, they were successful 9 out of every 10 times. I think we've got to think about that. I believe deeply, and I believe you will agree with me, that if we can't get a meeting, we are not going to get a major gift. If our aspiration is to start a relationship, why wouldn't we focus on the front end of that process and utilize the resources we have with our board members to bring people in? And opening the door is often a much lower threshold activity. That when you talk to board members, they're afraid of that knee-to-knee moment of solicitation more than they are of that moment of calling their friend and saying, I'm working on something I believe in. Would you be willing to talk to X? It's a very different experience, but a very powerful role that they can play. But let's go further. We also look at board member engagement and gift size. When a board member is involved at any part in the process, gift size tends to be 5 times larger. It's not just the moment of solicitation. It's any part of the advocacy, the case telling, the connection to the organization. And I think that it happens this way for this reason. You go to someone as a development executive and you ask them for a gift, and they're going to give you a minimally considered gift many times. But their peer, whom they see as someone that they would look to, that they respect, that they would be influenced by, that they would conform to normative behavior around, they're going to think twice about what that gift size is because they're not going to want to disappoint their peer. And they're not going to want to come in at a giving level that is below what their peer would expect. So 5 times larger gift size. Now we've got to look at renewals. You've seen the information that's come out from Cygnus Research and Penelope Burke year after year that says that our first-time donors to our organization, 65% of them are going to go away. They are never going to make a second gift. You look at donors who've even been for us for a while, and our fall-off rate is still higher than we would want or would expect. Yet, when you talk to people about what would incline them to give to an organization, people said receiving thanks from a board member would make them 3 times more likely to give again. Again, it's a low threshold activity. It's a great place for board members to be active, and if instead of churning through donors all the time, you could keep your family intact, think of what that could do for your organization. Now, all of this works because of the power of something called social capital. Robert Putnam from Harvard University wrote a delightful, tiny, tiny little book called Bowling Alone. And in Bowling Alone, he talks about the power of social capital and says that it's basically earned goodwill or earned trust. That when you've had relationships with people before, you know how they're going to behave. You know how they're going to collaborate with you. And so having that earned goodwill gives you social WD-40 to grease the skids of a relationship, or social superglue to bind you to others. But when you ask people to utilize their social capital, you are asking them to use their own good name as collateral. Let's think about that for a second. How many of your board members have said to you, I'm not comfortable asking my friends, I'm not comfortable going out there and being in this role. And so if people are not comfortable being advocates for you, you have lost the power of their social capital. But if you are able to harness the power of social capital, think how much more valuable that connectivity and advocacy is for you, even than their personal ability to give you a gift. There is a leveraged effect there. And so we must figure out how to harness social capital. And I want to show you today some ideas for how I believe that you could do it. So with that, your nonprofit organization, I believe it's like a gyroscope. If you ever played with a gyroscope as a kid, it's just a little piece of metal. And if you set it down, it falls over, except when you put the string on it. If you put a string and you twist it around and you pull it back and set it down, it takes on a life that exceeds your expectation. It defies all that you would think would happen from this little gyroscope. And so with our organizations, our boards can be the string. If we think about how we're going to utilize them well, they can give your organization life that would exceed everything you thought it could do. So we have to start, though, with the fundamentals, the boring basics, the things that are simple but not always easy. If your board did not meet or function for 2 years, what would the biggest consequence be? If you're sitting there and thinking about your board and you're thinking, not much, it's time to retrench your board. You've got to think about, are you achieving the impact you want? Are you utilizing your meetings well? But more importantly, are you utilizing the time between those meetings well? What would your board ideally do? What would your board ideally look like? And if you're going to design a board that is going to perform well, you do have to really think about how you're going to put it together. It's everything from your term limits to your board rollover provisions. It's everything from how you select them to how you orient them, how you structure your meetings, all of those things together to design your board experience. And so you need to be very thoughtful and conscious of designing something that will perform to deliver the outcomes that you want. And then I always think of Jim Collins. We can rely on Jim Collins for great advice about people. And you've all heard over and over again from his book, Good to Great, that it matters who is on the bus. I think the selection of who we bring on our boards is one of the most important and most powerful decisions that we will make, and yet most of us do it poorly, quickly, and annually, instead of doing it deliberately as we go forward. If you are selecting your board members based on arbitrary criteria, of course you aren't getting what you want. So think about instead, and I'm not saying you shouldn't try to strive for diversity, but strive for diversity that is deliberate. When you look at what must we accomplish, who brings qualities needed to be successful, who could effectively help us engage key partners, whose influence or endorsement is essential to success, and who could help overcome obstacles. Think about those who bring the qualities, the information, the connectivity that you need to drive this organization forward, not simply whether someone is a lawyer or an accountant, a male or a female. We need to drive for outcomes, not for arbitrary attributes. We've also got to think about how we bring people into this board. We need to quit underselling this commitment first and foremost. You've seen it happen over and over again. You go and you sit down with someone, you say, we'd like for you to join the board of directors. It's a really important responsibility. And they look back at you across the table and they say, well, I'm not really comfortable raising money. And you say, oh, don't worry, you won't have to do that if you don't want to. And we only meet once a quarter over lunch. It won't be painful. Why would we induce mediocrity at the very beginning? We've told people, don't worry, it's not going to be a lot of work. Don't worry, some of the things that are core to our mission are not really that important. So we undersell our commitment. The other thing you've got to consider is don't fill seats because you have them. You know how that happens. You come down to the end of the board year and you have 8 people who are rolling off the board this year, and everybody sits there in this teeth gnashing moment in your nominating committee, and they say, well, we have 8 people rolling off, so we have to think of 8 people we're going to bring on, and you can think of, say, 5 who are really good. And everybody's like, well, we should think of somebody to fill those other 3 seats. Well, no, you don't. You know, go back to your bylaws, see what you really have to have, but don't fill seats at the front end with people you know to be less than what you wanted or possibly mediocre. The selection of those board members on the front end is going to drive the performance of that organization over the entire period of their term. Why would you make this a small decision when it has such a big impact? So instead, think about what those standards are that you must have and fill the seats with those who are excellent. And then the other trap to avoid in recruitment is don't sidestep that you are a fund development organization. It is astonishing to me how many organizations I go into that they think they are another board of the hospital. They think they are an allocations committee. They do not understand that the philanthropy organization's entire reason for being is to raise money. Period. End of sentence. If they think they're going to come on and influence programs and give away money, and they're not going to have any responsibility for helping to invite people into the organization, once again, you've set yourself up for failure on the front end. So, other things to consider within the basics. You've all heard of work, wealth, wisdom, blah, blah, blah. Add one more to that. The thing you want most, you want their involvement, their intelligence, their investment, all the things we've talked about forever. But you also want their influence. It goes back to that whole concept of social capital. The most powerful thing they can bring to you most of the time is their influence. Opening up their own network, expanding the circle of friends of the organization. So being very explicit about that at the front end also gives you a huge opportunity to ensure that your expectations around the work are aligned. I think we also need to talk to leaders who are coming on about the role of steering versus the role of rowing. You know, you think about how different your healthcare foundation is from most nonprofits. When they're on the board of most nonprofit organizations, they're kind of like an island out there alone that the board is having to deal with human resources issues, with legal issues, with growth management, with all of those things which most of the time are actually handled by your hospital. Because you're not an island, you're kind of an island with a big continent wrapped around it. And so the considerations are much different for the role of governance in your organization. You don't need as heavy a traditional governance structure as most nonprofit organizations do. And board members also need to understand that when they come to the Healthcare Foundation, different from their experience where on most boards, the only actions that are important, the only actions that are binding are collective actions when they're all gathered in a room. The most important things they're going to do with your healthcare foundation are those individual actions that are going to happen outside the boardroom. So we've got to talk about those rowing roles, those individual roles, where we've each taken ownership to go and connect people to the organization. Now with that, again, it's clarifying expectations. Before you make any big commitment to anyone, you should make sure you're all on the same page. I always talk about a friend of mine who's with a significant foundation, and he said, you know, when we go out and we recruit board members to come in, he said, we say, this is going to be hard. It's going to be a lot of work. We're going to want to see you a lot between the meetings. We're going to want a lot from you. This is what it's going to look like. Are you good with that? And so going into it, everybody knows it's not going to be easy. We're not going to come for lunch once a quarter. We're not going to let you just come and be the gatekeepers. We're going to ask you to get knee deep in our work. We're going to ask you to participate with us as true partners. Now, I think you also need to consider for your board, Ways that you can give people graceful exits. How many of you know who Tony Hsieh is? Who's Tony Hsieh? Close, you're on shoes. Zappos. He's the CEO of Zappos. So Tony Hsieh goes out and he hires new employees to come into the Zappos organization, and he feels very strongly about his culture. And he feels it's really important to have the right people in the room for his organization. So he'll hire you, and he'll bring you in, and you'll go to orientation for 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, he goes and he finds an individual, and he says, "Welcome to Zappos. How are you feeling about working here?" And they talk for a moment. And then he says, "You know, I'm going to give you an offer. You can either stay here and be part of this organization, or I'll give you $10,000 to leave right now." He said anybody that takes the $10,000 was never going to be committed to our work at the level they needed to be. They were here for the wrong reasons. And he said, "I want to get rid of them at the beginning. I know you can't go give people $10,000 to go away. However, think about how you create." Jack Dresser's thinking about giving some people $10,000 to go away. You could have left them at dinner last night. They wouldn't have come to the bus on time. I'm so glad you sat in the front, Jack. Yes, I always need a prop. So, you know, instead, though, think about those ways that you create natural, graceful exits for people. So, for example, every single year, every board member, regardless of if they're in the middle of a term or ending their term, gets a willingness to serve form again. And it says, these are the roles and responsibilities of board members. These are the commitments that we need you to make. We understand life changes. You may have committed to us last year, and since then your work situation has changed, your family situation has changed, your personal health has changed. We know there are lots of variables about there. And so we're asking you to indicate, can you do this for one more year? It gives people a chance to say, am I in or am I not? And if people choose not to sign that willingness to serve, you simply thank them and recognize them and honor them with all the other board members who are naturally rolling off. It creates a very clean way for people to escape. Because you know what your board members do now? You know, don't you? They just quit coming. You're carrying them on your roster. They're waiting for their term to end. You're taking a very valuable and limited resource in a board seat, and you're squandering it on someone who you're not going to see the whites of their eyeballs in your board meeting. So creating a way that people can naturally escape is a positive for the organization. So those are some of the fundamentals, but I believe we can go even higher than that. And that's where I want to challenge you to think about your board in a different way and to import practices from other disciplines, other places. One of the things that I look at a lot is just simple human psychology. There's been a lot of work that was done by a guy named Ed Deci. He's at the University of Rochester. He's actually a psychologist. He started doing work back in the 1970s looking at human motivation. What do we respond to? What do we want? What drives us? And what he said was, we're not really motivated by carrots and sticks. You'd think that external rewards like promotions, recognition, money were the things that were really going to drive people. But he says, actually, it's generally not. Instead, we're looking at things like relatedness, competence, and autonomy. Now, I'm going to dig further into these, but it goes then to the work of Dan Pink. Dan Pink looked at Deci's work, and he built on it. He looked at some work that was being done by Elizabeth Camper at Harvard University. And he kind of pulled together both of their research threads, and he came up with another look at this. And he said people are driven by purpose, mastery, and autonomy. Purpose is that desire to make a difference in the world. Pretty clear cut. Mastery is to learn something and to be good at it. And autonomy here is defined as the ability to make your own decisions, that you're not subject to the whims of others, that you get to make decisions for yourself. And so if you bring those two threads together, I think we need to consider this for our board. And so I look at purpose, mastery, and autonomy, and Deci's relatedness, competence, and autonomy as being purpose, confidence, and choice in our relationships with board members. So let's dive into these. Purpose is about contributing to something that is greater than yourself. It's about being part of something. It's about making an impact on the world. One of the interesting pieces of resource that's been out there is that people want to get back on the path that brought us all here. A lot of your board meetings, you know, are about logistics, meetings, and other things, and you kind of strip the mission often out of the very organization that they came to help. But when a Gallup study was done and they asked people what they most wanted out of life, 98% of people said they wanted purpose. They wanted to know that they'd made a difference in the world. They wanted to know that they had left the world a better place. And so with that, we've got to think about how we're going to tap into that intrinsic motivation that is there. I think with that, we start here. We must change the semantics of our work. This is not about fundraising. Fundraising, you know, for so many, has a negative connotation. It's about arm twisting. It's about taking people somewhere they don't want to go. It's about transactions. Instead, I think we need to talk about philanthropy. I don't care if somebody can give you the $2 widow's mite gift or the $100 million. They can all be philanthropists. Philanthropy is about a values-based orientation to being engaged in our work. It's about true partnership and standing shoulder to shoulder to achieve a shared objective. It's about relationship and partnership. Our work is about philanthropy, and philanthropy is noble. Don't ever let people denigrate our work by making us into transactional fundraisers. I think we have to embrace the work that we've got and realize that raising money is not about chasing people with deep pockets, but about embracing people with deep purpose. So let's change the semantics on the front end and talk about what we really do. When we do that, then we have an opportunity to talk to people about where their heart is, the impact they want to achieve, how they want to be involved. Because whether you're talking to donors or to board members, it's in large part about fulfilling their own personal needs, having an opportunity to extend their own values, their own beliefs, to create their own legacy. So let's create the platform for that. But it also means you have to take a different sensitivity to selection of board members, because it all starts here. It starts with their heart. It starts with what their purpose is and what their beliefs are and what they want to do and how they want to be involved. It starts with their personal experience. How have they interacted with your healthcare organization? Why is this close to their heart? And if you go out and you ask people a few simple questions like, what has your personal experience been with our organization? And they look back at you and they go, well, and they don't have an answer for you, they are probably not well suited to be a board member. If you have someone you want to engage in the life of your organization, if you have someone you want to proselytize to loving your cause, putting them on your board is not the place to do it. We need to have people on our board who are already true believers, that this is already consistent with their vision of themselves. So think about other questions that you can ask them as well. What first kindled your interest in our mission? What experiences have you had with the organization? What do you believe in and care about that connects you here? What core values could you extend through this work? What impact do you want to have on this work and on this world? What about our mission gives you hope or joy? And what legacy do you want to leave here? When we start having conversations with people about values, we quit chasing people who have money to be on our board. Now, having the financial wherewithal and inclination to invest is wonderful. But I would tell you that having someone with power, with prestige, and with pocketbook potential who does not also have purpose is not someone you want to recruit to your board. Why would you bring someone on who has all those other attributes and doesn't really care about your work? You know what happens. You go out and you recruit the person that you know to have considerable means, and they come on your board, and because it's not their passion, they don't give. And the person sitting next to them looks at this person who has huge financial capacity, and they say, well, they're not giving. Why am I giving? And it ends up bringing down your board to the lowest common denominator, rather than having somebody look and say, wow, the person next to me, they have like an amazing last name. They're really well connected. Instead, they look at them and say, look at all they could have done that they didn't. So if we quit chasing money, we know that there are simply going to be people who don't fit on our board if our paradigm is rooted in purpose, if our paradigm is rooted in our shared values and our shared ambition for the organization. The other thing you've got to consider there is mission. This sounds crazy, but I've had the chance to ask hospital foundations from across the country for copies of their board minutes, going back over the span of about a year. And if you sit down and you read them, there are committee reports, financial reports, reports from the president, all these other things. Guess what's not in their board meetings? Anything about the work that they do. The closest a lot of organizations come to it is that the CEO is going to give a report, and they're going to talk about how many inpatient days they had, and maybe possibly about some programmatic or service initiatives that they have, but they never talk about impact, outcomes, and how it's going to affect the lives of people. So think about your board meetings. Is your mission in your board meetings? Because if we're not connecting back again to the purpose, we're creating a position where we're going to disengage those who could be our best advocates. So we've got to make sure that we're weaving the mission into all the work we're doing, because we want people to be inspired and invigorated and to want to go out and to be advocates for us. We don't want to bring them to our board meetings and again bore them to death and then send them out the door. What a waste it is to bring high-powered, smart, high-performing people into a room and talk at them. We've also got to think about how we talk to them from the heart to the heart. It's the same thing. We know that most of our donors will make their decision to give to our organization based first on emotion, and they will justify it rationally. You have to give your board members the stories and the tools to be able to go out and tell those stories themselves. You know, again, let's root all of our work back in purpose. So moving on from purpose, let's think about confidence. You know, this is another key failure point in a lot of our boards, and it looks something like this. 59% of board members say they are uncomfortable in a fund development capacity. Most specifically, they say, I do not want to go solicit. Again, looking at surveys over and over again, fundraising is the most dreaded task, the most hated task. So again, let's not ask them to be part of fundraising. Let's ask them to be part of philanthropy, of building relationships, telling stories, creating partners for the organization. And within that, we need to recognize for ourselves that development, as we know, is a broad spectrum of interrelated activities that all lead to creating vibrant partnerships. So we got to quit focusing on that whole solicitation piece that you know is one tiny, tiny piece of the puzzle. That's the very piece that alienates a lot of your board members. And so we've got to think about where else could they be involved. Because we know that smart, culturally aware, emotionally intelligent people avoid things that they think they're going to be bad at. And so if on the front end we've given them only a few options and they find them distasteful, they simply will disappear on us. I often tell the story about Jimmy Johnson, who was preparing his Dallas Cowboys to go to the Super Bowl. And he took these guys, these huge hulking guys in, and he said, I want you to do something for me. And he took a 2x4 plank and he threw it out on the floor and he said, I want you to go and walk from one end of that plank to the other end of that plank. And they're like, whatever, coach, no big deal. So they all go and they walk across the plank. They get to the other side. And he said, that was easy for you? And I said, yeah, that was not a big deal. He said, great. He took the plank, he put it 10 feet up in the air, and he said, I want you to go and I want you to walk from one side of that plank to the other side of the plank. And they said, are you crazy? We're not going to do that. What are you even asking us to do? And he said, you just did it. But the problem was before they recognized that they had the transferable skills to get it done. And when they put it in this new context, suddenly they were afraid of it. And so we've got to also help board members see where their translatable skills are going to prepare them well to do the task that is before them. Because sometimes they become so overwhelmed by the context that it's in that they're afraid of it. We also have got to quit treating our board members like a homogeneous group of individuals. We don't recognize that they have unique needs and preferences, unique skills, unique strengths, unique reasons for being there. Instead, most of the time we go and we say, you know, Linda, welcome to the board. We're so glad you're here. Now that you're here, we would like for you to identify people who could be on the board. We want you to set an initial meeting. We want you to tell the story. We want you to ask for the gift. We want you to help negotiate it. And when it's done, we want you to help steward it. How are you feeling?
Great.
A little overwhelmed. And there's probably at least something on that list that she's like, I don't want to do that, and I'm not going to be good at that. And so she's going to disappear again. So instead, let's think about our board members as a pit crew. I want to show you a really short video. All these guys work on a pit crew. They all know exactly what their role is. They know what they're supposed to do. And every person is put on a position in the team where they know they're going to excel. And frankly, if they're not, they're moved to another position on the team. So watch how they work together. Pretty cool, huh? So instead of thinking about your board as being a group of individuals that have to do everything, instead consider how each of your board members can take their own unique strengths and preferences and just do what they would be good at. We look at board leadership and engagement in 4 different dimensions. There are going to be people who are natural closers. They are comfortable in asking. But the interesting thing is that only about 15% of the US population identifies with the characteristics that would lead to being closers. So when you bring your whole board on and say, we need you to ask, you've just alienated 85% of your board. And you got to ask yourself, do you really need them to close? Most of the time, no. You have the skills to close. And so those who this is in their wheelhouse, let them do it. And the others, let them find another place. So the other group up here, the connectors, they're great door openers. About 50% of the US population will identify as connectors, door openers. These are the folks that when they go to a party, they know everyone. They're the folks that you call if you need a plumber or if you need a job. They can tell you who's related to whom and how everyone is connected to each other. They tend to tell stories about people. You know who these folks are on your board. So if they're great board members, or if they're great door openers, and we know that board members are 4 times more effective at opening doors than we are, you know where to engage these folks. They can be at the very beginning of the process to say, I'm working on something amazing. I'd love to get you involved too. Would you be willing to meet with so-and-so? So you've got a role for them as well. Then you have the caretakers down here on the bottom right. Caretakers tend to be folks who are very traditional. They're very loyal. They're also very devoted to people, but they're not the folks who like to go to big parties. They're the folks who have a few really close, treasured, long-term friends. If you have a friend from elementary school who is still one of your best friends, you are often a caretaker. Caretakers are great at stewardship. They want to let people know that they made a good decision in giving to the organization. They want to let people know that they're appreciated for their involvement. They want to really get to know people. So think again about that stewardship role. If people are 3 times more likely to give to our organization again if thanked by a board member, it's another great place to put your board members to work. And then finally, the champions. Champions are knowledge experts. They love to take information and put it in context, show how things are related to each other. So they're great at being advocates to explain the case for support to others. Now, it's interesting that when you look at most healthcare CEOs in this country and most physicians, with the exception of a couple of groups that I'll tell you about, they're champions. So they're not askers either. They're great at explaining the clinical rationale for the case, putting things together, sharing the vision, all of those things. But even when you think about how you utilize those advocates beyond your board, most of them are going to be champions. Those who are physicians who don't tend to be champions are family medicine and OBGYN. They're caretakers because they're much more relationship driven than scientists, knowledge driven. So what do you think about, instead of having everyone do everything, having everyone figure out what their role is and where they fit? I will tell you that it liberates board members to be able to say, I don't have to do everything anymore. I only can do the stuff that I'm good at, and the stuff I like to do makes a big difference. The other monkey you've got to take off your board members' backs is they don't have to know your whole case statement. It just killed me that there was an article in the Chronicle of Philanthropy probably 6 months ago where they said a lever to high performance in boards is to make sure everyone has a 60-second elevator speech. Well, boo-ha-ha on that. We've been doing that for a long time, and board members say, I can't remember it, I feel stupid, I'm afraid I'm going to mess it up. Board members need to know the only thing they need to go and tell people is why they care, why they believe. They can bring you in as the expert witness. They can bring in your physician or your CEO. You can be the ones who know all the facts of the fact that the new CT scanner has a 0.76 gantry ray rotation and has a cycle time of X. You know that. They don't need to. So instead, just ask them to go out and tell people why they care, because if they're going to deploy their social capital, what their relationships are looking for out of them is their authenticity. They're being genuine. They're being trusted. So they don't have to know all the facts. They just need to let people know why they're there. It takes a lot of pressure off of your board members, and they can find a place where they can perform at a high level. So going to the final bucket, choice, autonomy. How many of you give your board members a list that says, over the course of the year, we would like for you to identify 10 people to put on our mailing list. We would like for you to fill 1 table at the gala. We would like for you to make 3 personal face-to-face solicitation calls, blah, 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 blah. People get that list and they're like, oh, here's a whole to-do list of stuff I've got to do, and half of it, again, I don't like. So instead, first of all, let's think about what are the things that you have put on their list that are low-value activities. If you have board members doing tasks that don't require board members, take them off their list. You need to reserve them for important donor-facing activities. And then beyond that, think about how you give them choice. So there was a great social science experiment where they took a group of people in a room, and to half the room, they gave a piece of paper with 5 pre-printed numbers. And they said, these are your lottery tickets. To the other half of the room, they gave them a piece of paper and a pencil and said, write down 5 numbers. These are going to be your lottery tickets. Before the alleged drawing was to occur, they went back to everyone and said, we want to buy your tickets back. These folks over here, they had no ownership for those tickets. They were given 5 pre-printed numbers that meant nothing to them. They readily sold their tickets back. Over here, you had put your anniversary date, your child's birthday, your lucky number, other things that were personal to you, and that you had some degree of ownership for. And so when they came back and wanted to buy your ticket back, you were reluctant. And if you were willing to sell it back, you wanted more money for it. Think about the implications that can have for our boards. How can you let them write their own lottery ticket? Instead of giving them a punch list of things they need to do every year, instead consider having face-to-face individual conversations with every single board member. Talk about their preferences, talk about their strengths, talk about what they want to achieve, and design an individual engagement plan for them. Within it, talk about the support they're going to need to be successful, and frankly, talk about how you're going to hold them accountable. People have said, don't ask me to do something that then you're not going to follow up because it tells me it wasn't important in the first place. So it's funny that this is another one of those very simple, simplistic things. And I've talked to a lot of development executives who are like, oh, I talk to my board members all the time. We don't need to do this. We're on the same page. And I've said, you know what? Just go try it. Go set individual one-on-one meetings with every one of your board members, or go with, say, the chair of your governance committee, your board chair, whomever it may be. Go and sit down knee to knee and have this conversation. And development executives have come back to me and said, wow, I had no idea what would happen. We had conversations that we have never had. I've known this person for a decade, and for the first time they told me what was truly on their heart, why they were really here, and they told me exactly what they wanted to do. Organizations that have taken on this very simple feat have found it has done amazing things for them. So, of course, I couldn't just give you 3 circles. I have to give you 4. So one thing I would hope that you would all consider is how we're going to expand this tent. You all know that years ago, most of our governing boards kind of washed our hands of fund development and handed it to the foundation board or to the development committee. But one of the things that I am proud of and excited about is that the American Hospital Association Center for Healthcare Governance has recognized that fund development needs to go back into the governing board meetings. And so there have been a lot of conversations that have been happening and a lot of education being pushed towards your hospital trustees that says, you have a role, and here's what your role looks like. That first of all, the foundation board is not the Pee-wee team and you're the big board. Instead, we are two boards with equal stature and different roles. That we need to make sure we have top shelf people in both organizations because we've got to do this in partnership to advance our mission. We've also got to consider that your governing boards are tasked with a few very simple things. One of those is to set the strategy for the organization. Another is to ensure the financial strength and stability of the organization. But you can't build a rocket without having a rocket booster. They can sit in the board meeting all day long and talk about how they're going to transform care and how they're going to achieve competitive advantage and how they're going to grow services and redo campuses and whatever it may be. But if they don't have the financial wherewithal to do it, they are pipe dreams, not plans. When you look at the typical organization in our country right now, they have a 2.2% operating margin. That means it takes $45 million earned from clinical operations to put $1 million on the bottom line for reinvestment. Whereas, I know Steve shared numbers with you this morning, you look at a healthcare philanthropy organization performing at the median, it takes them $1.33 million to put the same $1 million on the bottom line for reinvestment. And while some folks feel uncomfortable with it, you've also just got to think about the differences that are required in infrastructure, in people, in all those things to generate dollars on the clinical side of our house, whereas on the fund development side of our house, we know that it takes a strong story and the right advocates and just getting out and connecting with folks. And so with that, there are a lot of boardrooms that are having conversations about how we reposition philanthropy to be a strategic revenue resource for our organizations. The time when philanthropy was a decorative social endeavor that funded the nice to have must be gone. You, as leaders, need to help us get there. And part of the way we're going to do it is by getting this work back on the governing board agenda. Because when the governing board recognizes that our work is valuable, it creates a platform for performance that means things are possible that you absolutely couldn't do without them. So when you think about the board, some of the things your governing board needs to do is to help build that culture for philanthropy inside your organization, to ensure you have adequate investment in the fund development function, to make sure that you have access to patient information that is allowable under HIPAA. All of those things that happen within the walls of the hospital, they've got to make sure they're unleashing resources and access to you to do your job. So we also need to be talking to the governing board about better project selection. It's another huge failure point that I see in organizations, that they're raising money for some random something because nobody could articulate what our vision was of our potential. And so that's another place for us to bring the governing board, the foundation board, the hospital executives, and development executives together to talk about what must we achieve, what must we be, what must we do, because we know that we have to have that strategically aligned vision to create a powerful case. And with that powerful case, we can build powerful advocates for our organization. So consider how you're going to talk to your chief executive officer about getting back on the governing board agenda. I believe these things, purpose, confidence, choice, and collaboration, are the keys to remaking our boards, to creating a new board paradigm that can carry us into this vibrant future ahead of us. And so I would encourage you to go back and think about your board in a new way and how you're going to go and light the match to spark a new level of performance, to take your organization to a place you might have never considered you could go.